There is a reason the days leading into August the 12th may feel different, as though something beneath the surface of your ordinary life has begun moving before you can even explain what you are sensing. On August the 12th, the daylight will disappear as the solar eclipse takes place, and that moment can become a powerful symbol of interruption, revelation, and change. This is the solar eclipse of August the 12th, and before we go any further, there is something important you need to understand about the way this moment may affect the way you see your own life. An eclipse is not simply something happening above you in the sky. In spiritual astrology, it can be viewed as a moment that interrupts the familiar pattern, creating space for awareness, reflection, and a different relationship with the path you have been walking. For centuries, human beings have looked toward eclipses with awe and fear. Ancient civilizations created temples around celestial events, performed sacrifices, prayed for protection, and sometimes kept their children indoors because the disappearance of the sun seemed to signal that the natural order itself had been disturbed. They did not possess the language of modern astronomy to explain orbits, shadows, and celestial mechanics, so they interpreted the sudden darkness through the spiritual framework available to them. They imagined gods becoming angry, divine forces changing direction, and even cosmic serpents consuming the light. Yet beneath all of those stories was something deeply human. The realization that when the most dependable source of light suddenly disappears, the human mind is forced to confront uncertainty. That ancient emotional response still has a psychological echo within us today. You may have technology in your hand, appointments on your calendar, responsibilities waiting for you, and an entire modern world surrounding you. Yet there can still be a quiet instinct inside you that reacts when daylight unexpectedly changes. That reaction can remind you that beneath your rational mind, there is a nervous system that responds to mystery, uncertainty, and the feeling that something larger than yourself has shifted. This is why the August the 12th eclipse can become meaningful on an inner level. It invites you to look at the parts of your life that you normally keep moving past, because staying busy is easier than becoming completely honest with yourself. And if you found yourself watching this message at this particular moment, perhaps the reason it feels personal is not because some invisible force physically brought you here, but because something within you is already searching for an explanation for the changes you have been feeling. Maybe you have sensed that an old chapter is losing its emotional power. Maybe something that once felt certain has begun to feel strangely unfamiliar. Maybe you have been asking yourself questions that you were previously able to avoid. Whatever form that inattention has taken, this eclipse becomes a moment for examining it more honestly. So stay with me, because there are 7 sacred truths we are going to explore, and understanding them can help you recognize whether the changes unfolding around you are pointing toward a deeper transformation or simply revealing an identity you have already outgrown. Before we continue, I also want to share something that entered my own life during a threshold period, a time when familiar patterns had to be questioned before something different could take their place. It is called Train Your Brain to Make More Money. This exists for the person who may be experiencing spiritual awakening while still carrying deeply established beliefs about scarcity, worthiness, and abundance. There is often a strange separation between what someone believes spiritually and what they allow themselves to experience practically. A person can believe that life is abundant and still feel uncomfortable receiving more. A person can understand the language of possibility and still carry an unconscious expectation that money, security, or opportunity belongs more naturally to other people. This is where the idea behind Train Your Brain to Make More Money becomes relevant to this particular kind of inner work. It is not presented as a system based on constant hustle or exaggerated promises. Instead, it focuses on subconscious patterns that may quietly establish limits around what you believe you can receive, keep, or create. The larger point is that awakening is not supposed to remain an idea that exists only in meditation, spiritual reflection, or private moments of insight. It eventually reaches into ordinary parts of life, including your relationship with money. When an old internal pattern begins to loosen, the question becomes what you will allow to occupy the space it leaves behind. If this eclipse represents a symbolic clearing of old patterns, then becoming conscious of your relationship with scarcity and abundance can become part of understanding what that clearing means for you. The link is in the description below and pinned in the first comment, so you can find it easily after this video. And if this message already feels familiar to something you've been experiencing internally, Tell me in the comments where you are watching from. Your experience may be different from someone else watching this, but that does not make it less meaningful. Subscribe if you want to continue following messages like this as we move through this period together. Now let us return to the deeper meaning of the eclipse, because the most important part is not simply that the sky becomes dark. It is what that temporary darkness can cause you to notice. Before telescopes existed, before scientific explanations gave humanity precise language for celestial movements, people watched the sun disappear and experienced genuine terror. Some believed the gods were dying. Others believed a cosmic creature was swallowing the light. Entire cultures interpreted the eclipse as evidence that the structure holding existence together had been threatened. Today, we understand the astronomical mechanics behind an eclipse, but understanding the mechanics does not erase the emotional response that darkness can awaken. There is still something psychologically powerful about watching the familiar light temporarily change. It can bring your attention toward uncertainty, and uncertainty has a way of revealing what you normally keep hidden beneath routine. Think about how often you move through your day without questioning the structure of your life. You wake up, complete your responsibilities, answer messages, work toward familiar goals, maintain familiar relationships, and repeat familiar habits. Because those patterns repeat, the mind begins to interpret them as identity. Eventually, you may stop asking whether the life you are maintaining still reflects who you have become. That is where the symbolism of an eclipse becomes particularly powerful. It can represent a temporary interruption in the light that normally allows you to see everything according to the same familiar definitions. Instead of immediately reaching for certainty, you are invited to notice what appears when certainty becomes less available. This may explain why the August the 12th solar eclipse can feel connected to questions that have been quietly developing for months or even years. Perhaps you have been asking whether the career you built is actually the career you want. Perhaps a relationship has continued because you are afraid of what ending it would mean about your future. Perhaps a wound has become so familiar that you began calling it part of your personality. Perhaps you have become so accustomed to making yourself smaller that you no longer recognize how much energy is required to maintain that version of yourself. These are the kinds of questions that can become difficult to ignore when an eclipse brings the symbolism of darkness, interruption, and revelation into focus. The question is simple, but it can be uncomfortable. Are you living according to what your deeper self truly wants, or are you continuing along a path because fear once convinced you that it was safer? The eclipse does not need to be understood as a force that literally controls every event in your life for this question to matter. Its significance can come from what it encourages you to notice. Sometimes clarity does not arrive because the answer suddenly becomes obvious. Sometimes clarity arrives because the distractions become impossible to maintain. When the familiar light changes, the hidden shapes become easier to recognize. That is why an ending, a realization, or an unexpected emotional reaction can sometimes become more revealing than a period when everything appears stable. I told you there are 7 things you need to understand, and we are beginning with the first truth, because everything that follows depends upon how you interpret the changes taking place around you. The first truth is that this eclipse is not something you should automatically interpret as happening against you. The deeper spiritual perspective is that it can be happening for your growth, your awareness, and your movement into a different chapter of yourself. You may have spent years believing that difficult events were evidence that life was working against you. When something disappeared, you may have asked what you did wrong. When a plan failed, you may have wondered whether you were being punished. When someone walked away, you may have interpreted the ending as proof that you were not enough. But what if you have sometimes confused disruption with rejection? What if an interruption can also become an invitation to reconsider a direction that no longer fits? The first truth asks you to sit with the possibility that your current circumstances are not random pieces of a meaningless story. Every person alive during this period is experiencing a particular moment in history, and the spiritual interpretation of this eclipse is that you are here to encounter this particular threshold within your own lifetime. You did not choose every circumstance consciously, and you cannot control every outcome, but you can choose how you understand what is happening. That distinction matters because your interpretation influences your emotional response. If you believe every ending is punishment, you will cling to what is leaving. If you believe every change means failure, you will resist necessary growth. But if you can consider that some disruptions may be revealing what no longer belongs, you create room for a different kind of awareness. Let that idea settle before you rush toward the next truth, because the coming weeks may contain situations that only make sense when viewed through this broader perspective. The second truth is more difficult because it deals directly with what has been hidden. An eclipse does not need to ask whether you feel emotionally prepared before it becomes a moment of confrontation with reality. Things that have been avoided can become harder to ignore. This may involve a relationship in which important truths have remained unspoken. It may involve a career situation where you have known for some time that something is wrong but continued because changing direction felt too frightening. It may involve an old emotional wound that you learned to disguise so effectively that you began mistaking the disguise for your personality. What you call being independent may sometimes be fear of needing anyone. What you call being practical may sometimes be fear of taking a risk. What you call being loyal may sometimes be fear of letting go. These distinctions can become uncomfortable because they challenge the story you have told yourself about why you behave the way you do. And this is why the emotional atmosphere around a major transition can feel exhausting. You may find yourself unusually sensitive. You may feel detached from activities that once gave you comfort. You may notice that certain situations no longer produce the same emotional response. Instead of automatically assuming that something is wrong with you, you can consider that your internal relationship with those things may be changing. Your mind may still be trying to preserve an old structure while another part of you has already recognized that the structure is no longer sustainable. That tension can create emotional fatigue. It can make ordinary conversations feel heavier. It can make familiar environments feel strangely distant. It can create the sensation that you are waiting for something without knowing what that something is. Within the spiritual framework of this eclipse, those feelings can be understood as signs that your awareness is catching up with changes that have already begun beneath the surface. And that brings us to the third truth, because when hidden realities become visible, the next question is, what happens when something actually leaves? This is where many people misunderstand eclipse symbolism and accidentally create unnecessary suffering for themselves. Imagine that something disappears during the period surrounding August the 12th. It could be a relationship, a job opportunity, a friendship, or a plan that you had protected with every ounce of determination you possessed. Your immediate response may be grief. You may feel rejected. You may ask why something you wanted so deeply was taken away. You may begin searching for evidence that you were abandoned by the universe or that your prayers were ignored. But there is another way to interpret the same experience. An ending does not automatically mean that you have been punished. Sometimes an ending reveals that the structure you were trying desperately to preserve could not continue with the person you are becoming. Think about an old piece of furniture that once belonged perfectly inside your home. You may have loved it for years, and you may have memories attached to it, but when the structure of the house changes, that same object may no longer fit the space. The object did not become worthless. It simply belongs to an earlier arrangement. The same can happen with relationships, plans, identities, and expectations. You can honor what something once meant to you without forcing it to remain forever. You can acknowledge that a friendship mattered without deciding that it must continue unchanged. You can recognize that a career gave you stability without concluding that you must remain there for the rest of your life. You can love a version of yourself that survived difficult years without continuing to live according to the limitations that version needed in order to survive. This is why the metaphor of surgical removal can be so powerful when discussing eclipse endings. The process may feel painful because separation is painful, but pain alone does not prove that the separation is wrong. Sometimes the discomfort comes from releasing something familiar, not from losing something necessary. Think back to an ending from your own past that once seemed unbearable. Remember how certain you were that you could not move forward without that person, that position, that plan, or that identity. Then remember what you know now. Perhaps you eventually discovered freedom where you once saw devastation. Perhaps a closed door created space for a direction you could not have imagined while you were still holding the previous one. Perhaps the thing you begged to keep was exactly the thing preventing you from discovering what came next. That does not mean every loss should be romanticized, and it does not mean every painful event automatically carries a predetermined cosmic purpose. It means that when something begins falling away during the days surrounding August the 12th, you do not have to immediately define the experience as proof that you are unworthy, forgotten, or abandoned. You can pause, you can observe, you can allow the emotional wave to move through you before making a desperate decision. You can resist the instinct to chase something simply because losing it makes you afraid. You can resist bargaining with a situation that may already be changing. You can give yourself enough space to discover whether you are grieving the actual thing or grieving the version of yourself that existed because of it. That distinction can change everything about the way you experience an ending. The deepest lesson is not that you should become detached or stop caring. It is that you should become conscious enough to recognize when attachment is asking you to betray your own growth. If something is leaving during this eclipse period, you may feel the impulse to grab tighter, explain more, plead longer, or prove that you are worthy of being chosen. But sometimes the most powerful response is to stop fighting the movement and allow reality to reveal itself. Your hands cannot receive something new while they are completely occupied with holding what is already leaving. Your emotional life works in much the same way. When every part of your attention is consumed by preserving an old arrangement, there is little room left to recognize what the change may be teaching you. This is where the symbolism of the eclipse returns to the central image of light and darkness. The temporary darkness does not erase reality. It changes the way reality is perceived. It gives you an opportunity to notice what you normally overlook. And perhaps that is why you have been experiencing unusually vivid dreams. Perhaps certain names have been coming back into your thoughts. Perhaps particular places have repeatedly appeared in your awareness. Perhaps certain numbers seem to show up often enough that you cannot help but notice the pattern. Whether you interpret those experiences spiritually, psychologically, or simply as heightened attention, the important thing is what they are causing you to examine within yourself. The eclipse becomes a threshold for awareness, and the more honestly you observe what is being revealed, the more prepared you become to understand the deeper truths that follow. That is where we will go next, because truths 3 through 7 move further into the questions of fate, timing, and the destiny you believe is written into your life. Something inside you may already know that the days surrounding August the 12th are asking you to pay attention, because the quiet voice you have spent years questioning may become much harder to silence. That inner knowing has often been buried beneath logic, fear, advice from other people, and the constant pressure to make decisions that appear reasonable from the outside. Yet, as this solar eclipse approaches, the distance between what your conscious mind says and what your deeper self knows may begin to feel smaller. You may experience a sudden certainty about a choice you have been postponing for months. You may feel unexpectedly drawn toward a person, a place, or a direction that you cannot explain through ordinary reasoning. You may also discover that something you once tolerated without question suddenly feels impossible to accept. Do not automatically assume that every unfamiliar feeling is meaningless simply because you cannot immediately explain it. Within the spiritual meaning of this eclipse, these moments can become invitations to listen more carefully to yourself. Ancient mystics described this kind of awareness as a form of knowing that does not depend entirely upon thought. It can arrive through the body, through an unexplained calm in the chest, through a quiet certainty that appears when everything around you becomes still. Think about those moments in the middle of the night when the outside world is silent, and a truth you avoided throughout the day suddenly becomes obvious. There is no audience in that moment. There is no need to impress anyone. There is only you and the realization you have been trying not to hear. If you have recently experienced an unexplained pull towards something, or an equally strong resistance towards something you once accepted easily, this eclipse invites you to examine that response instead of immediately pushing it away. Your first instinct may be to label the feeling as anxiety or confusion, because familiar explanations feel safer than unfamiliar truth. But the spiritual interpretation presented here is that the eclipse can activate a deeper wisdom that has been present within you for much longer than you realize. It can become a moment of returning to a part of yourself that you stopped trusting. You have spent years learning how to listen to everyone else. You learned how to consider expectations, avoid disappointing people, choose practical options, and make yourself understandable to those around you. Somewhere along the way, you may have forgotten how to recognize your own internal answer. This eclipse can bring that answer closer to the surface. It can make the signal louder after years of static. This is why you should not rush to dismiss every unusual instinct that appears around this time. Instead, notice it, sit with it. Give it room to speak before you decide what it means. This is the beginning of a return to yourself. But the eclipse does not only expose what is happening inside you, it can also make the truth within your relationships harder to overlook. In the days surrounding the eclipse, watch the behavior of the people around you carefully, not with suspicion, but with awareness. People can reveal themselves through small actions that they never intended to make obvious. Someone who has been quietly resentful may suddenly express irritation more openly. Someone who has genuinely cared for you may demonstrate a level of loyalty that you did not realize was there. Someone who has benefited from you remaining small may become uncomfortable when you begin growing beyond the role they assigned to you. The important thing is not to become paranoid or interpret every minor behavior as a cosmic message. The deeper lesson is to observe patterns that were already present but that you may have been unwilling to acknowledge. An eclipse can become a symbolic unveiling, and what is unveiled may not always be what you hoped to see. You may discover who remains present when you have nothing to offer them. You may notice who celebrates your progress without competing with it. You may recognize who becomes distant when your confidence increases. You may also discover that some people you underestimated have been far more loyal than you understood. This kind of realization can be uncomfortable because relationships are often connected to identity. When someone changes their behavior toward you, it can force you to reconsider not only that person, but also the story you created around the relationship. You may have spent years explaining away someone else's behavior because accepting the truth would have required you to make a difficult decision. You may have convinced yourself that they were simply stressed, distracted, busy, or misunderstood. Perhaps you repeatedly lowered your expectations because it felt easier than admitting that the relationship was no longer balanced. The eclipse can bring attention to those compromises. It can make the difference between genuine connection and convenient attachment more visible. Pay attention to the people who appear when you need nothing from them, and the people who disappear when you need even the smallest amount of support. Notice who can celebrate your growth without becoming threatened by it. Notice who encourages you to become more fully yourself and who seems comfortable only when you remain predictable. These observations are not meant to create fear. They are meant to create clarity. Some relationships may not continue through this period, and that possibility can feel painful, but an ending does not automatically mean that something has gone wrong. Within the spiritual framework of this eclipse, a relationship leaving your life can represent a form of alignment rather than punishment. It can create room for connections that do not depend upon your usefulness, your silence, your sacrifice, or your willingness to remain smaller than you truly are. There may be people who love the version of you that needed them, but struggle with the version of you that knows how to stand independently. There may be people who are comfortable when you doubted yourself and become uncomfortable when you begin trusting yourself. Let the truth of those patterns become visible. Do not force someone to remain simply because you are afraid of the empty space their absence will create. Do not chase a person who is already choosing distance. Do not spend your energy convincing someone to value what they have already decided to take for granted. Allow the eclipse to reveal what your ordinary routine may have allowed you to overlook. Sometimes the most painful clarity becomes the beginning of the healthiest freedom. And while you are watching the people around you, do not forget to watch yourself, because your body may notice a change before your conscious mind has language for it. This is one of the most important ideas connected to the eclipse in this message. You may experience unusual tiredness that does not seem to disappear simply because you sleep. You may experience emotional waves that arrive without warning and disappear just as quickly. You may notice heaviness around your shoulders, tension in your chest, or a general feeling that you are carrying something you cannot identify. You may feel mentally foggy, emotionally tender, unusually sensitive, or strangely raw. Within the spiritual interpretation of this eclipse, these sensations can be understood as signals that your inner world is processing a change before your conscious mind fully understands what that change means. The body often responds before the mind can construct an explanation. When you have lived for a long time under emotional pressure, you may become so accustomed to functioning through discomfort that you stop asking what your body is trying to tell you. You keep working, you keep answering messages, you keep completing responsibilities. You tell yourself that you will rest later, but sometimes the body becomes the place where an unresolved emotional experience finally demands attention. Ancient healers understood the human being as connected to the larger natural world. They believed that celestial events could correspond with changes in the rhythms of the body, the breath, and the movement of energy. The spiritual perspective presented here is that you are not separate from the universe around you. You exist within the same larger system, and the symbolism of the eclipse can therefore become a reminder to pay attention to the relationship between your inner experience and the world around you. If you have felt different recently, do not immediately bury that feeling beneath productivity. Slow down enough to observe it. Breathe. Rest when you need to rest. Allow emotion to move through you rather than forcing yourself to appear unaffected. If tears arrive, let yourself acknowledge them. If you need quiet, give yourself quiet. The important point is that you do not interpret every difficult sensation as evidence that you are failing. Within the spiritual language of this eclipse, the discomfort can be viewed as part of an initiation, a period in which the internal structure of your life is being recalibrated so that you can hold a more truthful version of yourself. You may feel as though you are falling apart, when what is actually happening is that an old way of functioning is becoming impossible to maintain. The difference is subtle, but profound. Falling apart suggests destruction without meaning. Being remade suggests that something within you is changing its shape. This is why the body deserves your attention during this period. It can reveal the places where you have been carrying more than you admitted. It can show you where you have been forcing yourself to continue when what you actually needed was permission to pause. And once you begin listening to those signals, another truth becomes visible, one that reaches beyond intuition, relationships, and the body itself. During the days surrounding this eclipse, your life can be understood as standing at a branching point. The path ahead may not feel like one straight road anymore. Instead, different possibilities may begin to emerge, and your choices can influence which direction becomes more meaningful to you. This is the truth that requires everything else to be understood first. Within the spiritual interpretation of destiny, certain periods are considered more powerful for conscious choice than others, and an eclipse is presented here as one of those potent windows. The decisions you make during this time may feel unusually significant because they force you to confront the person you are willing to become. The conversation you have avoided can become a decision. The boundary you were afraid to establish can become a declaration of self-respect. The risk you have postponed can become a test of courage. Even silence can become a decision, because choosing not to act is still a way of responding to the circumstances around you. This may explain the strange urgency some of you have been feeling. You may not know exactly what is changing, but you may sense that continuing to sleepwalk through your routines is no longer possible. Something inside you may be saying that you cannot keep postponing the conversation, the boundary, the decision, or the truth forever. Within this spiritual framework, the version of you that chooses courage can move toward expansion and greater alignment, while the version that continually retreats into fear may remain connected to the same limitations and unanswered desires that have followed you for years. There is no neutral position when a meaningful choice is placed directly in front of you. Waiting is a choice. Silence is a choice. Returning to the familiar is a choice. Walking toward the unknown is also a choice. The important question is not whether every decision will produce the exact outcome you imagine. The important question is, which version of yourself is making the decision? Are you choosing from fear because fear wants certainty? Are you choosing from old conditioning because other people taught you what you should want? Or are you choosing from a deeper understanding of who you are becoming? Ask yourself that question honestly as August the 12th approaches. Which version of yourself are you strengthening through the decisions you make now? The intensity of this particular eclipse may also raise another question. Why does this one feel different? Why do you feel more aware of it than you did with eclipses that passed before? The answer presented here is connected to timing, not only the timing of the sky, but the timing of your own unfolding story. Eclipses arrive in cycles and patterns. Their appearances are not isolated moments, but part of repeating celestial sequences. This particular alignment is described as arriving during a period when larger cycles are reaching completion. That means the emotional weight you feel may not belong only to one day. It may represent the accumulation of choices, experiences, realizations, disappointments, hopes, and prayers that have been developing through your life for months or even years. Imagine threads being woven together one at a time without you seeing the complete design. One decision seems unrelated to another. One ending seems separate from one realization. One difficult conversation seems disconnected from one unexpected opportunity. Then suddenly, enough threads converge that the pattern becomes visible. That is the kind of culmination this eclipse represents within the message. This is why emotions may feel larger than expected. This is why certain memories may return. This is why people who normally avoid spiritual subjects may still become unusually reflective or unsettled around a major celestial event. Something about the moment can encourage people to pause and consider what they have been ignoring. You are not necessarily overreacting simply because the experience feels significant to you. The important thing is to understand the magnitude without allowing intensity to control your behavior. August the 12th should not be treated as an ordinary day within the spiritual framework of this message, because it represents a convergence point in your personal story. The choices surrounding this moment can continue to influence how you understand the months and even the years that follow. But recognizing the importance of a moment does not mean reacting impulsively to every feeling it produces. In fact, the next lesson is about learning how to remain steady while everything inside you feels more active. Eclipse energy, when interpreted through this spiritual lens, can feel overwhelming when you do not give yourself enough space to process it. Strong emotions can make small problems appear enormous. A temporary frustration can feel like a final judgment. A sudden desire can feel like an absolute command. A disagreement can feel like proof that an entire relationship must end immediately. This is why you should slow down during the days surrounding the eclipse. Do not rush into major decisions simply because you feel an urgent need to change everything at once. Do not sign something today that does not truly need to be signed today. Do not say something irreversible in the middle of an emotional reaction if you know that a calmer version of yourself might choose different words. The symbolism of the eclipse is already associated with heightened revelation, so give yourself time to understand what you are seeing before deciding what action belongs next. Ground yourself through whatever practice genuinely helps you feel stable. That may be silence, it may be movement, it may be placing your feet against the earth and breathing slowly until you remember that you are safe in the present moment. It may simply be writing down what you feel without demanding that every emotion immediately become an answer. Some insights arrive as fragments before they become clear ideas. A dream may give you an image. A memory may return unexpectedly. A sentence may come into your mind while you are driving or waking during the night. Write it down. You do not have to understand everything immediately. Protect your energy during this period as well. Being open does not mean being available to everyone. Vulnerability is not an obligation. You are allowed to step back from conversations that drain you. You are allowed to create quiet when your inner world needs quiet. You are allowed to decide that not every person deserves access to the most fragile parts of your transformation. Think of a flower opening gradually. It does not owe its bloom to every storm that passes over it. In the same way, you do not owe every person access to your vulnerability simply because they ask for it. Wisdom sometimes looks like restraint. Wisdom sometimes means waiting until the emotional intensity has settled before responding. Move through this eclipse with the awareness that you have already survived every difficult chapter that came before it. You have endured moments you once believed would destroy you. You have carried responsibilities that once felt impossible. You have experienced endings you did not think you could survive. Yet you are still here. The spiritual message is not that you will avoid difficulty. It is that difficulty does not automatically have the power to break you. You can move through transformation without losing yourself inside it. You can become stronger without becoming harder. You can become more discerning without becoming cynical. You can become more protective of your energy without closing your heart completely. And when you imagine the person you may be 30 days from now, or 60 days from now, standing beyond the immediate intensity of this eclipse, try to notice what feels different. Imagine yourself lighter. Imagine yourself clearer. Imagine yourself more certain about what you will no longer tolerate. Imagine yourself less willing to betray your own needs simply to keep other people comfortable. That version of you is not being created from nothing. Within the message of this eclipse, that version already exists as a possibility within you. The eclipse does not manufacture your identity. It helps clear attention away from the conditioning that has made it difficult to recognize who you are beneath fear, expectation, and years of adapting yourself to spaces that never truly fit you. This is why the transformation can feel like reclamation. You have not survived everything you have survived simply to remain exactly the same person. You have carried your experiences toward a moment where you can finally understand what they taught you. You have endured things that forced you to develop strength, patience, awareness, and discernment. Now the question becomes what you will do with everything you have learned. Trust what is unfolding, including the parts that frighten you, because fear does not always mean that you are moving in the wrong direction. Sometimes fear appears because an old identity realizes that it may no longer control the future. There is a difference between danger and unfamiliarity, and learning that difference is part of becoming more conscious. On the other side of this eclipse, the version of you that emerges may feel unfamiliar to the younger version of yourself. You may be stronger, you may be wiser, you may be less apologetic about taking up space. You may finally feel at home within your own identity instead of constantly adjusting yourself to satisfy everyone around you. And this brings us back to the question of why you are watching this message now. Within the spiritual framing of this video, your attention arriving here is presented as alignment rather than accident. Out of countless distractions and countless pieces of information competing for your attention, you are here listening to these words at this particular moment. Whether you understand that as spiritual guidance, meaningful coincidence, or simply your own intuition leading you towards something that resonates, the experience can still become useful if it encourages you to pay closer attention to your life. Carry these 7 truths with you as August the 12th approaches. Let them remind you that you are seen, that you are capable of change, and that uncertainty does not automatically mean that you are lost. You are not required to have every answer before the next chapter begins. You are not too late simply because your path has taken longer than someone else's path. You are not behind because your transformation does not look like anyone else. Transformation. You are standing at a threshold, and the purpose of a threshold is not to prove that you already know everything. It is to invite you to decide whether you are willing to cross it. The eclipse can become a moment when the old version of your life becomes easier to recognize for what it is, and when the possibility of another version becomes harder to ignore. Yet, spiritual awakening is not supposed to remain an abstract experience that exists only inside your thoughts. The message also connects awakening with your relationship to the physical world, including your relationship with money and abundance. The same inner transformation that changes how you understand your identity can also challenge inherited beliefs about scarcity, worthiness, and whether you are allowed to experience more. This is where train your brain to make more money returns to the conversation. It is presented as a bridge between the internal awakening you may be experiencing and the practical relationship you have with abundance. The purpose described here is not to encourage empty promises or endless hustle. It is to address subconscious patterns that may have quietly shaped the limits you place around what you believe you can receive. You may have grown up hearing that money is difficult. You may have learned that wanting more is selfish. You may have absorbed the idea that spiritual people should not care about financial abundance. Those beliefs can become so familiar that you stop recognizing them as beliefs and begin treating them as facts. If you are ready to question those patterns, the link is available in the description below and pinned in the first comment. Consider it part of the same broader process of bringing your inner awakening into the practical areas of your life. The goal is not to separate spirituality from physical reality, but to recognize that the way you think, feel, choose, and receive can influence the way you move through the world. As this eclipse approaches, trust the process of becoming more conscious. Trust the observations that help you understand yourself. Trust the clarity that appears when you stop forcing yourself to remain attached to what no longer fits. Trust the need for rest when your body asks for it. Trust the boundaries that protect your peace. Trust the courage that appears when you finally admit what you have known for a long time. And most importantly, learn to trust yourself again. If these 7 truths have touched something inside you, share in the comments which one spoke most strongly to you and tell me where you are watching from. Your experience may be different from everyone else's experience, but your story matters because this period is ultimately about how you meet your own life. Subscribe so you can continue with the next message as this eclipse cycle unfolds, because the conversation does not end with one realization. It continues as the truths you recognize begin influencing the choices you make. The sky may create the moment, but you still have to decide how you will meet it. And that is where the next chapter begins.